Hello and welcome to another edition of Ideological. I am your host, Zach Lee, and today I've got a special guest, a good friend of mine, Randy Smith. Randy, thanks for being on the show today.
Oh, I'm psyched to be here, Zach.
That's awesome. Well, today we're going to be talking about evolution, which will be a ton of fun. So Randy is a Renaissance man. He is a man of science, former NASA employee. I'll let him talk a little bit about his background in just a second. But we're going to be talking about evolution, human evolution, how old is the Earth, a lot of science things. So we have some demonstrations here because science is very empirical. They're take-home prizes, see what you can win. And anyway, so before we jump in, though, I do want to give a disclaimer that Randy is a buddy of mine, but by being on the show, that doesn't mean that he necessarily endorses some of the other videos that I've done. So if I do something that offends you, angry email me. It just goes straight to the trash can anyway. I don't read it. And don't get mad at Randy. So with that in mind, Randy, tell us a little bit about your background and why you're the man to talk about this topic.
Well, we're talking about evolution, and I do want to preface this with, I'm not a professional evolutionary biologist. I'm an informed amateur, but I do have some unique skills. So from an early age, I was super interested in science. I grew up in Houston during the space program, and I was fascinated with our race to get to the moon, the Apollo program, and the ones that came before there. So I followed that very closely when I was, I think, in high school. I decided that I wanted to know something about everything rather than everything about something. And so that really changed my mindset and what I pursued. So I have kind of an unusual background. I don't have a PhD in biology or anything. I've got a very wide range of experiences. So I've been to 6 different undergraduate colleges in 5 different majors. Mm-hmm. And I graduated with a triple major from Rice in psychology, sociology, and behavioral science. But I majored in natural science, social science. I've majored in studied philosophy and theology. I went to an additional 4 different graduate schools. Mm-hmm. I went to Cornell, was working on a PhD in social psychology. I went to UT and worked on clinical psych. Mm-hmm. Ended up going to Texas A&M and got a master's degree in industrial engineering with a specialty in human factors engineering and human telerobot interaction. After schooling, I started my career. I went to work at NASA, went to the Johnson Space Center, which was my dream to work at NASA.
Yeah.
In fact, if any of their employees, I used to think, I would do this for free if they would just let me come and do this. That's how much I enjoyed that job.
They're coming for your pension then. If you say that, they're like, we're going to take that from you.
But it was a great job. It was a great job. I worked for several years at Johnson Space Center in Houston. Helped set up a research lab to study the human telerobot interaction. So it was with the astronaut crew, and we were designing the International Space Station at the time. Mm-hmm. So this was I worked there from the mid-'80s up through the early '90s. Then I got an astronaut that I had been in some meetings with and kind of knew. He recommended me for a job at Goddard Space Flight Center, which is in Greenbelt, Maryland. I went up there, and that was the space station headquarters was going to be up in that area. Spent another couple of years working at Goddard, and I was the astronaut office liaison to the space station, the telerobotic aspects of the space station. Did that. I went to work in a family manufacturing business. Mm-hmm. We invented, manufactured, and sold automotive aftermarket accessories to mass merchandisers, Walmart and things. I semi-retired, and I went and did some investing in multifamily real estate and operated some multifamily apartments. Then I became a full-time paid firefighter and EMT for 7 years. Totally different thing. Then I was the IT systems administrator for a small town, finished out my career there. We got an RV, traveled around the country for a year. Then I went to seminary for a year. And now for the last 7 years, it's been my passion and full-time job to do a serious academic study of the intersection of science, philosophy, and theology. And that has really consumed me. I just treat it like a full-time job. And we've talked before, and I've told you what I do. What do you say?
Oh man, you have the job that I want. I just want to be a full-time independent studier. Instead, I'm having to make these videos for you people. Thank you for that, by the way. So let me tell you why I asked Randy to talk about this topic in particular. So even though he's not a professor of evolutionary biology, he is much more well-studied than the average bear. I wanted to use Randy in particular because he is a true Renaissance man. As you just heard, it's everything from IT to psychology to science to theology to philosophy. It's something we've actually lost. That was an Enlightenment value. And today, everybody is hyper-specialized. They know everything there is to know about one work from one author instead of knowing a little bit about all the authors. And so I chose you on this for this topic intentionally because, I know you know a ton about science, but you also have experience and stuff in in other fields. And I think that actually is more helpful for this topic. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump into the first question. We're going to talk about evolution, evolutionary biology, human evolution, how old stuff is. It's old, by the way. Number one, can you summarize for us what is evolution? What is evolutionary theory? I think most people are pretty, they have a general concept of what that is, but can you give us, a good definition or a good explanation? What is evolution?
Sure. So evolution is the scientific theory or the scientific explanation of how living organisms have changed over time, over generations, and that's through genetic variation and natural selection to create the incredible diversity of life we see on Earth today.
Fantastic.
So that's a simple definition of evolution. Couple things I wouldn't mind talking about.
Please.
Is one, an analogy, because to understand this topic we're talking about today, I think it's important to really get down what that means, what I just said. So I've got some props here.
Yes, let's do it.
So let's say these are called Ammonites. These are an extinct ancient marine creature. And let's say you have a population of these Ammonite creatures, and they're all living in the same area, and they're all the same species, and they're all interbreeding. And you'll notice that they have different traits. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller, some are darker, some are lighter, some the shell is harder, some is less. So then I'm going to pull this DNA. This is a model of DNA right here, the double helix of DNA. So why do they have all these traits? It's because that's all coded in DNA, which is the code for all life forms on Earth, from amoeba to roses to whales to me and you. All that information, how to make you, is encoded in this DNA. So let's say these guys all have slight variations in their DNA code because of these variations, these physical variations. So then I'm going to take this fossilized shark tooth.
Yes.
Let's say they're in their environment. There are some predators, and these predators come and they like munching on these yummy ammonites. So let's say they like the small ones, crunchy on the outside, chewy on the inside.
That's how I like my ammonites for sure.
So they go after they like the little ones better than the big ones. And so I put one more thing over time. So what you have is...
By the way, I like the props. So I tried to get, when I interviewed the Navy SEAL, I tried to get him to shoot someone on camera, but he wouldn't do it. So these props are super helpful.
Okay, well, good. So if the sharks eat the little ammonites, the big ones are going to be the ones that survive and they reproduce. So evolution is in general, it is a slow process. So picture this hourglass. This is actually a 15-minute hourglass. Picture each grain in this hourglass is one generation of ammonites, a whole generation, not the life, but the whole generation of all of them. So I flip this thing over and you see generation after generation pouring through here. And so what happens is over generations, over long periods of time, these ammonites will tend to get bigger because being big is a beneficial trait for surviving in their environment. And so it explains how living organisms change over generations, over a long time, and change their form and even become different species. So these small changes accumulate over time. And Charles Darwin's big idea was that these beneficial traits become more common in the population over time. So in this case, it would be bigger.
There was a study, and I read about, I think we even talked about it at one point. There was a study done where there were moths in England, and because there was so much industrialization and so much soot, the moths that were darker would not get eaten as well, or it would not get eaten because the birds couldn't see them as well, whereas the lighter ones would. So that means then the darker moths are having babies and having babies and having babies. So you get this entire, group of moths that get darker and darker because of that. Same kind of thing what you're saying with survival of the fittest.
Yeah,
the winners win.
That's a great example, Zach. That's a perfect example. So it's due to the environmental pressures on these organisms. They change over a long period of time. Something that impresses me is how flexible living organisms are. When I was a kid, my parents raised Great Dane dogs. And then a couple of years later, they decided they wanted to raise toy Pomeranians. So if you know those two dog breeds, that's radically different.
Yes, not the same size.
No, they're not the same
yippiness
size
either.
And so all dog breeds, I think there's like hundreds of dog breeds, they all are descended from gray wolves just a few thousand years ago. And that's through the selective breeding of humans, domestication, but the environment does the same thing. So you could take a gray wolf and just within a few thousand years dramatically change the physical form of this dog. So it gives you a feel for just how flexible living organisms are. I think we tend to think that they're static and they never change, but that's not right.
Yeah, you're right. That's fantastic. That's a great answer, by the way. And the examples are awesome. Let me ask, so you already kind of answered my second question about what is the concept of survival of the fittest. Let's talk a little bit about human evolution in particular. How did humans evolve? When did we evolve? How does, because within the conversation of evolution, there's microevolution, change within a species, and there's macroevolution, change from one species to another. Talk to us a little bit about human evolution, and I'll have some other follow-up questions for that. But I think that's really the thing I think most people are interested in with this topic is, what does it mean for us?
Yes. Well, that's a good question. Human evolution. A quick, easy answer is that human evolution is the change in humans from our ancestral primitive forms to what we have now, from our primate ancestors. Now, just so you know, I have wrestled with human evolution, and my views have changed over time as I've learned more and more about this. Something to realize is that there is a massive amount of evidence for human evolution.
Yeah, and I want you to emphasize that real quick, just because one of the things I've heard from people is they say, we don't have these fossil records, there is no evidence of this, and my understanding is that's completely false.
Yeah, it is. I think it's a little bit of a philosophical answer, but I think one of the reasons people have trouble with the idea of human evolution is they do not like the thought that their ancestor was some slimy creature that crawled out of a swamp. They just intuitively resist that idea. And some naturalists would be quick to throw that out. I personally don't think you should be too quick to throw that idea out. There might be something to that. However, in terms of evolution, there is an overwhelming amount of fossil evidence for hominin evolution. I used to think there was just like, well, we just have like a couple of teeth and one femur bone. Lucy's all we have.
This is just straight vodka, by the way. It's not. Vodka. All right, sorry, go ahead.
But that's not the case. It's one of the most robust fossil records we have is of hominins, of mammals. Actually, it's a super detailed record. There are over 10,000 hominin fossils that we have found, and we find them all the time. We found one yesterday I was reading in the news. So it's a very robust record, and it shows a clear progression from primitive forms to modern humans.
So because you hear of Homo erectus and you hear about what are the kind of stages from primates to what we are today?
We split from chimpanzees about 6 or 7 million years ago, and that's when the hominin group started advancing. So we've gone through a lot of different species since then. One of them is Neanderthals. I'm sure you've heard of them. In fact, I did one of those DNA tests and found out I have some Neanderthal genes in me.
But wouldn't we all? Wouldn't we all have?
We do. Yeah. Everyone from North America, basically most of the people whose ancestry goes to North America has some Neanderthal.
Okay. They draw about as well as I do, for what it's worth. Every time I draw something like for my kids, I'm like, I've seen cave paintings and theirs are better. Sorry, keep going.
Well, I just want to point out something about the fossils.
Please.
That fossils are real things. They're real tangible things. So as we're talking about this, you might just blow this off and say, well, what? So this is a fossil. When my kids were little, I used to take them fossil hunting, and we have 3 kids. So we all had little rock hammers and stuff. And I found this ammonite just right around here, buried in the rocks, because this area was at the bottom of a sea, at one time for millions of years. So it's like, well, what is this extinct sea creature doing in this area where we live?
Yeah.
I mean, whatever you come up with, you've got to have a decent explanation for that.
Sure.
An informed explanation. So these are real things, and the same with the hominin. Some of the skeletons are nearly complete hominid skeletons of these more primitive forms.
Yeah.
So you've got to deal with that. I would just say that there are some, you mentioned the different species. So there are some big milestones that happened with human evolution. And I just point out some of those milestones I thought were interesting. One is about 6 or 7 million years ago, we started walking upright. And that was a huge thing, because by walking upright, you get several big advantages. One is it's more energy efficient. Walking on all fours takes more energy. When you're upright, I don't know if you realize it, but you just use gravity and you just throw one leg in front of you and let gravity pull you down. So it's a very efficient way to move. By walking upright, we could see over the grass. And a big thing is it freed our hands. So now our hands are free to carry stuff and to use tools. So what happened is about 2.5 million years ago, hominins started using tools. We have primitive tools. And in fact, one of the things they used to use was a little later than 2.5 million years ago, but we started using obsidian rock. So some of these
I've seen that for like arrowheads. Yeah, I was going to say for weapons.
Obsidian is actually, it's not a rock, it's glass. It's volcanic glass. But when you flake it, it flakes off super sharp. In fact, this thing here, you can touch it. It is incredibly sharp. Yeah. And so they started using this to cut meat and to carve on bones and stuff. So that was a useful thing. That was 2.5 million years ago. I think we got control of fire about 1 million to 1.5 million years ago. And that was big for protection and for cooking. So when we started cooking, it made our food easier to digest and softer. About 300,000 years ago, modern humans, Homo sapiens, showed up on the scene. And then about 100 or 200,000 years ago, we started having evidence that humans were burying their dead, which is a very interesting theological and philosophical concept that these hominins seem to have some abstract understanding of life after death or a spiritual world or something. I don't think we should be too quick to point out that hominins have had 100 or 200,000 years of believing in an afterlife or thinking there's something to that. About 60,000 years ago, we came out of Africa. So the hominins came out of Africa, and some spread east into Asia, some spread west into Northern Europe. About 50,000 years ago, you start having cave paintings and sculptures. So you can see this progression. I've ordered this. My wife's like, what are you doing ordering that?
Yeah, that looks like that should be on my history of sex lecture.
As a naked woman.
Yeah.
But this is the Venus of Willendorf.
Okay.
It was a statue that's about 25 to 30,000 years old. This is a replica. So this is one of the very first statues humans ever made. And it's, like I said, about 25, 30,000 years old.
Wow.
So you see the slow progression. And then about 12 to 15,000 years ago, the last ice age, the ice retreated, and you could walk from Russia to Alaska through the Bering Land Bridge.
Yeah, the Bering Strait.
The Bering Strait. And so then you see hominins come into basically Alaska, go down the West Coast, populate North America, Central America, South America.
Yeah, that's something I think a lot of people don't understand. So when Columbus sails the world in 1942, kidding, I know it's 1492, and they come over here and there's already Native Americans, there's already natives in South America, most people are like, how'd they get here? That's how they got here. Because the way that the continents look now and the way that the ice caps are now is not how they've always been.
That's right. That's right.
Very good. Well, let me ask a few, I want to point out a few things and get your thoughts on this because there are still features that you can see in humanity that show a lot of this. So I'll mention a few. So one is that we have a tailbone, which is interesting because we don't have tails. I actually have a friend who fell and broke her tailbone recently, and I thought, monkeys, whatever. We have an appendix that serves no purpose. It's thought to be a vestigial organ of something that used to help us with digestion, but then changed. We get goosebumps when we're scared. Why? So that our hair on our body stands up and we look bigger, right? And scaring away animals or puffing ourselves up if we're going to get into a fight. Here's a weird one. We have canine teeth. Canine teeth don't serve the purpose of chewing grain. They also don't serve the purpose of chewing meat. Canine teeth is for biting necks. It's something that carnivores use and omnivores like us use. Babies grow a full coat of hair in the womb, which is crazy. A full coat of fur in the womb and then shed it. Your toe is the only toe your big toe is the only toe that's separate from the other ones because it used to be a thumb. So there's a lot of stuff here. And then you also mentioned people spreading out of Africa. This is why there's different features with people with their race or ethnicity is because if you're in a hotter climate, you're going to have darker skin to protect you from sunburn and, getting melanoma and these things. You're going to have less body hair, et cetera. If you're in a place that's colder where there's not as much sunlight, your eye color is going to take in more light. So it's going to be lighter colored eye. There's all these other things going on. And so there's a lot of things we can look at today. By the way, there's been a lot of just generations that have gone on here of these different creatures. Give me some of your thoughts on what are some things that we still see today within humans that kind of show this genetic past.
Okay. Well, those are some good examples.
Sorry, I probably just mentioned a bunch of them, so I didn't mean to take all your things.
No. You mentioned a bunch of, but those are good. But I'll give you a little more detail on some of those.
Yeah.
So these features are features that were useful to our ancient ancestors, but don't really have a purpose or are non-functional now. And so, like a tailbone, that is not a funny euphemism. That is actually what's left of our tails. We used to have tails, and some people actually can still control their tailbone slightly. You don't really see it.
I would freak out. If somebody does that, I'm not their friend. If that's you, don't send me a video. Please don't post that.
That's one, goosebumps.
Mm-hmm.
There are little muscles at the base of your hair follicles, and you can make your hair stand on end because when we used to be very hairy, if it got cold, you could have your hair stand on end. You trapped more air and it kept you warmer. Also, for predators, it would make you look bigger, or maybe for mating, you wanted to look as big as you could. So that is something we still have.
Yeah.
And we don't really use it as much, although we do in cold, you will get goosebumps. Just like that's an ancient reflex.
It shivers, shaking to stay warm.
Yeah.
Now we just have heated electric blankets, but they didn't always have such things.
Well, they couldn't find out where to plug them in.
That's right. They had them. They're just like, who's going to invent the light socket or the electrical socket? All right.
So that's interesting. If people get excited, they can get goosebumps. Even some moving music can give goosebumps. So if you are scared or angry, fight or flight, or cold, just realize that is an ancient response built into you that doesn't have the importance it did at one time, but we still have it. Another one you mentioned is teeth. You mentioned the canines. I thought it was real interesting that we have our ancient ancestors had a different diet, especially as I mentioned before, fire. So you would eat raw meat, you would chew tough, fibrous plants and roots and stuff. So you had to really grind and chew this up. So we had bigger jaws and we had big, giant 3 sets of molars. Most people just have 2 sets of molars. So your third set of molars is called your wisdom teeth. And humans don't really need them as much as they used to. About, I think, 20 to 35% of people are born without even having a third set of teeth.
Really? That's fascinating.
Yeah. So you see evolution and progress.
I've heard that, and tell me this, I've read on this, and tell me if this is right. I've heard that the reason that you have those extra wisdom teeth, one is for what you're eating. The other one is because you're grinding down your other teeth. About the time where you've started to wear those down when you're in your late teens, you then get another set of teeth to help with that kind, which is why the wisdom teeth don't come in till later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm not a dentist.
Yeah.
So
well, me neither.
I have my wisdom teeth because I have a big mouth, both metaphorically and physically. So I still am with the Neanderthals there. Okay. I'm sorry. I interrupted you.
Well, no. So wisdom teeth are very interesting. Something I found out is that our teeth have gotten smaller. Humans' teeth have gotten smaller because our food is soft and it's cooked, and we just don't need these big giant teeth. So our jaws are shrinking and our teeth are getting smaller. And so just to give a feel for how quickly evolution can happen, even as recently as 5,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians, and I've got a little ancient Egyptian thingy right there, their teeth were probably slightly measurably larger than our teeth. So they have changed just in the last 5,000 years. The jaws are, now, problem is, as our jaws have gotten smaller and our teeth have gotten smaller, our teeth get more misaligned. So it'd be bad to be an orthodontist in ancient times because you wouldn't, actually, they had pretty straight teeth.
Yeah.
These ancient hominids had pretty straight teeth. It's us having the problems because our diet has changed and our teeth and our jaws are all changing.
I blame the British for bad teeth. So somehow they're at fault.
One I don't know if you mentioned, but I thought it was interesting, is that we have muscles to control our ears.
That's true.
Yeah.
I can kind of do it if I...
Yeah. I was looked out in my yard. We have a lot of rabbits around here. And I walked up to the door and there was a rabbit right outside my door. And he took his ears and he could control them separately. And he took one big ear and aimed it right at me. And he took the other one and aimed it out at the street. And I was like, wow, I've never noticed that. That is super cool. Well, our ancient ancestors could move our ears around to detect danger and detect things. So we don't really do that anymore, but we still have a little bit of control over our ears. So those are some vestigial features, some remnants of things that humans used to have. And it's no longer... we don't really need those for our survival anymore, which that was always a little bit of a misnomer, the survival of the fittest, because it's not the strongest or the fastest or the bravest. Survival of the fittest is more about surviving to reproduce. So sometimes I had a biology teacher in college, and he was talking about evolution. And he said, well, sometimes you would think that in males, human males, the largest and the strongest, the most aggressive males, that would be an advantage to surviving. In some situations it is, but let's say you get in a war or there's some conflict, the big, super hairy, aggressive males could be the first ones that rush off into danger and get killed. And the shorter, skinnier guys with some good survival tactics might be the ones that survive and pass their genes along to the next generation.
The intelligence. Assuming if you have two humans and they're the same intelligence, the big, strong one wins. But if the other one is smarter, more reserved, can work better with other people, can make weapons the other one doesn't have, they then have an advantage that is better than just brute strength, which is why humans can tame an elephant.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it changes. So the environment is always changing, and that's why the populations of living organisms change. I had the demonstration of the Ammonites and the shark. But let's say the environment changed slightly, and all of a sudden the large Ammonites were more visible, and the little Ammonites could hide. Well, now all of a sudden the evolutionary process starts going in the opposite direction, selecting for the little Ammonites, not the big Ammonites. So the environment on Earth has always changed. It's still changing. Just watch the news. I mean, there are volcanoes and earthquakes, things. It's a very active planet, and it has always changed.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I heard you had mentioned that some of these things we needed at one point. We don't need it as much now. We have softer food. We have things where we're not constantly being hunted, but we still see those things. I was listening to he was a professor at Yale, and he was giving a presentation on how even when somebody, and I'm not trying to be too crass, but even when somebody is using contraception or they get a vasectomy or whatever, it doesn't change their sex drive because their brain doesn't know that they're not actually producing offspring. So it still thinks that they are, despite the fact that practically they're not. So you still see these things. And so, yeah, I've heard somebody say it this way, that we evolved to do the 4 Fs, which is to fight, flee, feed, and reproduce. And so that's what we're talking about with survival of the fittest, though.
Well, you bring up a really good point, that the whole concept of evolution requires, I think, 5 key pieces for this to work.
Okay.
One is you have to have some pressures in your environment, because you have more creatures or scarce resources. Not all the creatures that are born survive.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have pressure in the environment. You have to have variability in the traits. So just like humans, you look around, wow, what a variety of traits. Big, tall, short, smart, different colors, different facial features, different abilities. You have to have a wide variety of these traits. And then you have to have a lot of reproduction. So almost all living creatures have a strong drive to reproduce. Mm-hmm. And you have to have lots of deaths, because evolution doesn't work if everyone just stays alive forever. Mm-hmm. And finally, you have to have a massive amount of time. So if I could point out one thing about time that's super important for this whole concept, probably should have almost brought it up at the beginning, not only helping us understand evolution, but science in general, is something that's a concept called deep time. And it is the vast expanse of time on Earth, way beyond human lifetimes, way beyond human civilizations. So, and it stretches to billions of years. And most people do not, it's hard. I mean, even if you study it and think about it, it is such a huge, vast number. It's hard to wrap your head around it. So I'll use this little, this little hourglass or 15-minute glass. So I've tried to estimate, let's say there's 10,000 grains in this glass. And each grain represents a generation. So let's say if Homo sapiens, it represents a generation. Homo sapiens have been around for about 300,000 years. So I'm a baby boomer. So my whole baby boomer generation is represented by 1 grain of sand. And so I flip this thing over, generation, there goes me, there goes you, all these generations, your grandparents, great-grandparents, it's just pouring through. Just this, if this was 10,000 grains and each grain is, let's say, 30 years, this only represents 300,000 years that Homo sapiens have been on Earth. This isn't even close to the amount of time that has elapsed since life has shown up on Earth, or the age of the Earth.
Well, so, let's jump into that then, because I think that's a great place to go from here. Evolution takes a lot of time, as you've mentioned. How old do most scientists think that the universe is? What are some of the evidences for that? Maybe geological or astrological evidences for that. And so basically, I want you to kind of talk about 3 things. Estimate of how old the universe is, estimate of how old Earth is, estimate of how old life is.
Okay.
So you can do that in any order. It doesn't have to be perfect numbers. Obviously, when we're talking about billions of years, I've heard people sometimes that are overly critical where they're like, well, they said it was 8 billion and now they say it's 9 billion. And I'm like, they're doing the best they can. Give them a break. So knowing that there can be some wiggle room, give us your thoughts.
So we'll start off with the age of the universe. So the universe is, we believe, 13.8 billion years old. And this is based on multiple lines of evidence. So it's not just one little test that someone did. One of the big evidences is something called the cosmic microwave background, the CMB. And that is this faint amount of light and heat that is out in the cosmos, and it's everywhere. So that we started figuring this out in 1964. 2 scientists at Bell Labs had a big antenna, and they had this static in their antenna, and they kept trying to get rid of this antenna or the static, and they could not get rid of it. They even tried, they thought it was maybe pigeon droppings inside their antenna, and they cleaned that. They could not get rid of it. And then it turned out that it was the cosmic microwave background everywhere is sending static into this antenna. You can actually see it if you ever see an old style, they're not around much anymore, a CRT TV like we used to have, before flat screens. If you were on an unused channel and you just have static, a small percentage of that static you are picking up is the cosmic microwave background left over from the Big Bang. That's what you're seeing. And so the guys from Bell Labs, they actually won a Nobel Prize for discovering the cosmic microwave background. When I was at Goddard, there was a satellite called the COBE satellite, the Cosmic Background Explorer, and it was managed out of Goddard Space Flight Center when I was there. And that very accurately determined the age of the universe by looking at this cosmic microwave background. And those guys, one of the senior scientists at Goddard, won a Nobel Prize for doing that also. So let me try to describe how it works.
Please.
So as we look out there, there's very, very faint heat everywhere you look. But it's not even. It's kind of a little bit splotchy. So as they look at this, picture an analogy is you walk up to a pond, and there are ripples in this pond going out. So you weren't there to see when a rock was thrown into it, but you see the ripples. And so you can measure the ripples as how fast they're spreading, how far apart they are, how they bounce and interact with each other. And that's basically what the CMB has done, is they are ripples from the creation of the universe, are still bouncing and floating around out there. And through some physics, you can analyze this and determine how old the universe is. Now, there's other ways it works, but that's an analogy how analyzing the CMB works, is ripples in a pond. Another thing is that the universe is expanding, and the farther out you look, the faster all the stars and all the galaxies are moving away from each other. So that was one of the big things. That's a simple way to understand the creation of the universe, is you can look and see the stuff moving away, and you just run the video backwards, and you see, well, this was all had a start, a beginning 13.8 billion years ago, which is a crazy thought. Physicists for hundreds of years thought that the universe was static. It just was and never changed. And now all of our best scientific data says no. The entire universe, matter, energy, space, even time, all started. They used to not exist, and they all popped into existence at a single point in time 13.8 billion years ago. It's a mind-boggling concept that science supports a beginning to the universe. Is one of the biggest things.
Is that being the Big Bang? Is that
yes, that's the Big Bang. That's the Big Bang.
Yeah.
Another one is, this sounds kind of technical, but it's actually a simple explanation. There's a type of star called a Cepheid variable star. And it was figured out that this one star, it pulses very regularly. And 100 years ago, it was in the news 2 weeks ago, it was on the national news. It was the 100th anniversary of Edwin Hubble using the regular pulsations of Cepheid variable stars to determine how old the universe is. So this is a real mind-boggling concept, but people used to think, like, I know we've talked about in the ancient Near East, what they thought the universe was. It was the Earth, flat Earth, a big hard dome over our head with some lights stuck in them, and on the bottom, waters above, waters below. So we kind of thought that for millennia. And then you could see at nighttime, you can see this light from the Milky Way galaxy, but you couldn't tell what those were. It just looked like a band of light. And Galileo came up with the telescope, and he said, that's not just a fuzzy light. Those are all stars. So then we started realizing, oh, wow, well, this is like, those are stars. And then we discovered the Milky Way galaxy, and the universe all of a sudden went to about 100 billion stars. 100 billion galaxies, 100 billion galaxies. So probably, I don't know how old you are, but probably about when you were born, that's how big we thought the universe was, is about 100 billion galaxies.
So this has changed just in the last 20 years. I'm not 20. I'm just
But now we have the James Webb Space Telescope, and the Hubble Space Telescope has been up there, which also Hubble was at Goddard when I was there. That's managed that. And we now believe that there are closer to 2 trillion galaxies. So that we used to think that there were no galaxies. Then we thought, well, the Milky Way is the only galaxy. Then we realized, well, it was Andromeda. That's what Edwin Hubble did, was awesome. So there was this little blob of light. It was called the Andromeda Nebula. I thought it was just some dust and gas. And then he realized that that's not a blob. That is a galaxy. That's a separate galaxy from the Milky Way. This was only 100 years ago, where we realized the Milky Way wasn't the only galaxy in town. There's another galaxy, and now there's 2 trillion galaxies. So anyway, it's awesome how our ideas have expanded of how big the universe is. So one thing with the Hubble Space Telescope that I want to point out, please, because it is meaningful to me. I went by the Hubble Mission Control when I was at Goddard and watched some of this stuff, look through the windows and stuff. Hubble did a really interesting thing, the Hubble Space Telescope did. They took a little patch of sky that just looked dark, looked like there was nothing there. And it was a tiny, tiny patch of sky, about as big. If you put a grain of sand on the end of your finger, held it at arm's length, that's as big a piece of sky as it was. And they took this gigantic Hubble Space Telescope and aimed it at one spot and just left it there for 10 days straight, just staring at that one spot. And when they analyzed the data, they realized that that little dark spot had 3,000 galaxies in it. And then they repeated that a few years later, the Hubble Ultra Deep Field, and found 10,000 galaxies. So basically with that and the James Webb Space Telescope, everywhere you look, just galaxies, like as many galaxies as you can count.
To think I'm a speck on a speck on a speck, like it's crazy.
And that's changing your lifetime. How much bigger the universe has gotten.
Yeah.
They say the average galaxy has about 100 billion stars. So there are more stars than there are grains of sand on the Earth. If every time you see a grain of sand, just think that is a star out there. And all the grains of sand on the whole planet, the Sahara Desert and all the beaches, is not enough sand.
It's nuts. That's fascinating. Okay, so that's fascinating. And I could talk about the age of the universe, because the universe stuff freaks me out. Anytime I watch a space thing, I'm like, no. Talk to us a little bit about that. That was a great answer, by the way. Talk to us a little bit about, so as we go from bigger to a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller, age of the Earth, as far as what the scientific consensus is, and then also age of life.
Yes, good. So the age of Earth is 4.54 billion years old, and life, as best we know, is about 3.5 billion years old.
And what's that? Was that single-celled organisms? When you say life at this point, we're not talking about full-fledged humans. We're talking...
The first life was probably something like a bacteria, like blue-green algae. Mm-hmm. And we have fossils. Actually, I have one here.
Yes.
These are called stromatolites. And they're bacteria that grow in mats and layers, and they grow up towards the sun or the light. And this is the oldest life form we've found on Earth, these single-celled bacteria. They have found these that are 3.5 billion years old. This one here is from Peru, and this one's probably, you can see the little lines where they grow. That one's probably 1 to 2.
Probably can't zoom on that, but we can put a picture on.
It's 1 to 2, 1 to 2 billion years old, that the life form, and that's an actual fossil of them. So that's 1 to 2 billion year old life form right there.
That is an old bacterium. That's crazy.
Anyway, so how do we know the age of the Earth? Because I mentioned the cosmic microwave background and the expansion and the redshift, which is like the Doppler you hear when a train goes by. Yeah. That's how we determine the age of the universe. Now we're narrowing it down. How do we know about the age of the Earth? And then all the way down to the age of life. So how we know about the age of the Earth is through the radiometric dating, and we can talk more about that, how that works.
Yeah.
Where elements decay, some elements are unstable, and they decay over time.
Well, let's talk about that as this. I'll just kind of combine these two questions together, and you can answer however you want. What is carbon dating and what is radiometric dating?
Okay.
Because I've heard buddies that are like, they don't know. And I'm like, who are you? You're just some guy. My understanding is those things are actually very accurate. But I want you to talk to what is carbon dating, what is radiometric dating, and then based on that, what do we think the age of the Earth is? And I'll let you just kind of go wherever you want to go.
Okay. Radiometric dating is a well understood physical principle process. So it's not, some people think, well, if you're talking about evolution and you mentioned radiometric dating or carbon-14 dating, they think it's some obscure, weird test not related to anything else that evolutionists, that's not right. Radiometric dating is based on two important things. One is the physical properties of elements. We know about elements. I've got a couple of elements here, the periodic table of elements. There's magnesium and tungsten, two of the lightest and heaviest elements. And so we understand at an atomic level. So atoms can become unstable, an individual atom. I make an analogy. It's kind of like this top. I can spin this top, and if it's spinning good, it's nice and stable. But if the forces get off, it will start wobbling. Sure. And that's kind of like an atom is if the forces in the atom don't balance, it will be unstable. It's called an unstable element. And it will try to get in balance by emitting some particles, some energy to get back stable.
Is it someone describe it to me like this, and this could be incorrect. Again, my training's in the humanities, not science, but they said that it's really just based on the half-life of atoms. The way that we know that that it works and that it's consistent is because it's based on that. Is that correct, or is that something different?
No, it is. It's based on half-life.
Okay.
And half-life is also a very well understood principle. We understand radioactivity. We all have gotten medical tests. Yeah. So I have another analogy. I have lots of little analogies.
Here. I'm gonna move.
So let's say I have this coin, little Kennedy $50 my wife found in her jewelry box. Let's say I flip this coin, and how's this going to land? 50% of the time heads, 50 tails. If this is a fair coin.
Yeah, and if there's something about one side slightly heavier, but yes, in a perfect world, I know what you mean.
In a perfect world, and if this is a fair coin, 50%. Now, it doesn't matter if I do this on a ship or if I do it at the top of a mountain, if I did this on the moon or Mars, if I did this on the other side of the universe, this thing is still going to be 50% heads, 50% tails. So the half-life of atoms is a fixed known principle. It's through a variety of evidence, atoms decay at a fixed rate. And so carbon is one. Carbon-14 is a form of carbon. We're carbon-based life forms. It's super prevalent in the universe. And there's also carbon-12. Carbon-12 is the stable part. Carbon-14 is an unstable part. So I'll try to explain carbon-14 dating real simply because it seems like a lot of people with evolution get locked on that. Well, carbon-14 dating, that's not accurate. First of all, coin flips are accurate. Radioactive decay is accurate. And it's widely used. Point out, and don't let me forget where I'm going with that. Yeah. But speaking of radioactive decay, radioactivity is used all over the place in our world.
Yeah.
And I thought this was an interesting example of a radioactive half-life that is used in the daily objects we have. This is a smoke detector from my house. And I took this apart. Don't do this at home because I kind of know what I'm doing. Maybe not really.
Right. Yes.
So in the smoke detector, you got the little alarm, a tiny little simple circuit board, but you have this thing. This is called an ionizing smoke detector. Ionizing in this case really means a radioactive smoke detector. They decided probably that buying radioactive smoke detectors would not help you sell these things. So they call them ionizing smoke detectors. Actually says it on the back right there. Yeah. Ionizing inside here, do not ever take that apart. Okay. That has americium-241, which is a highly dangerous radioactive element that probably came from a nuclear power plant or a decommissioned nuclear weapon. It's in there and it decays at a fixed rate. I think it's like 432-year half-life.
Yeah.
And this is used, and its predictability is used to detect the presence of smoke. We use this everywhere. We understand these principles very, very well.
Let me summarize what you just said, because I think it's really important. Other than the fact that now I really want to go take apart my smoke detector and break into it. What you just said I think is really important. This is not just something, the people are not just taking some dirt, throwing it in a chemical and saying, I think it's this old. This is not an evolutionary specific thing. It's like gravity. Gravity is used in all the sciences, right? And so it's not just one thing. This is something that in other fields was already established, and it's a mathematical certainty. When we're talking about half-life of atoms, this is not, these are very consistent. And so that's just something that people that are doing the radiometric dating are using. They're not the only group using that. They don't just have some agenda or some axe to grind, is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. Right, exactly right. And so it's just a well-understood principle that's used all over the place. So 2 big things with carbon-14 dating. One is you have these, we understand the physical principles of elements. And then we also have something called spectrometers, mass spectrometers. So if you want to date a sample of some organic material or something that's been alive or dead, or even a rock that's 1 billion years old, you can use radiometric dating. So these things decay at this consistent half-life, and then you have spectrometers. So this is a prism.
Oh, yes.
This is a nice one, glass. And sometimes I look out my office window and I'll just look at the sunlight, and it's awesome. You just see the light broken into all of its component parts, red, blue, green, yellow. It's just spectacularly beautiful when you look out at the world through a prism. So this takes something and splits it, a spectrum. A spectrometer is something that splits light into a spectrum. And then I can analyze, if I use this, I can analyze, well, how much red light, how much blue light, how much violet, yellow, and through a lot of sophisticated and very sensitive instruments, I can understand a lot about that. So what you do in carbon-14 dating is you take a sample and you split it into its component parts, and then you can see, well, what elements are in this sample? And so by looking at the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14, you can determine how old something is. So it's like, well, how can I do that? It's actually, when you study this, it's actually a pretty simple process. The atmosphere of Earth contains both carbon-12 and carbon-14. We breathe it, plants breathe it, we eat plants. It's a fixed ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14. Carbon-12 is a stable element. It does not change. Even when you die, the carbon-12 in your bones, it stays the same. Carbon-14 is an unstable element, like my little top. It's unstable, and it's trying to get to a more stable form. So as soon as you die, the carbon-14 will start to decay, and you will have less and less carbon-14 in whatever the sample is. I use an analogy like that popcorn. You take a pan, you put some popcorn in it, you get the heat going. At first, the popcorn's like pop, 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 a bunch of popcorn's going. But then over time, there's less and less and less popcorn, because you could say this popcorn is like decaying. You have less and less of the popcorn decaying. So you have 2 different things. You have one element that does not decay and another one that does decay. And I know the original amount in the atmosphere, which is in our bodies. All you have to do is look at the ratio of the carbon-14 to the carbon-12, and knowing that the half-life is 5,700 and I think 30-year half-life, you can figure very precisely when this thing died, because it quits eating and it quits breathing, and the carbon-14 stops. You only have carbon-12. And so we have some things, uranium-238 decays into lead-206, at a half-life of billions of years. It's almost weird. It's like someone put all these clocks in our world, and they're just sitting there waiting to be used and seen. If you just open your eyes, it's really kind of freaky that there are all these things that are stable clocks to use to figure things out.
Yeah, we're not guessing. To say another, So I want to summarize what you said, just because I told you downplay your credentials at the beginning, because you're a man of science. You can tell from your knowledge of this stuff. Let me summarize it and make sure this is correct, just for the audience listening. What the spectrometer does when it comes to carbon is the same thing that the prism does when it comes to light. It gives you a stable thing, and then it gives you the variable. And then by seeing that delta, by seeing that difference, you can tell how old the thing is.
Exactly. You use a spectrum or a spectrometer or a mass spectrum. Mass spectrometers or spectrometers are used all over the place. They're used in chemistry and physics and medicine. They're used in forensics, in crimes. You hear about, well, so-and-so, they found a body and they're trying to solve a murder. Well, how do they do that? Was the person, and they can't see any obvious wounds.
Yeah.
So how do they know that? Well, you can take a sample. You can run it through a spectrometer. You can look for poisons, toxins, explosives. gunshot residue. You can look for all kinds of
stuff. So they look
stuff.
at the half-life of whatever chemicals in the mercury.
Yeah, with a spectrometer, you take the sample and you split it into all its component parts. So you can see all the individual elements that are in that sample. And from there, you know, well, man, this element's only in explosives. What's going on? Or only in poisons.
Yeah.
So that's when someone says they're going to do blood tests and get back to you, they're running it through a spectrometer. So they use this in medicine. They use it in pharmacology. It's used everywhere. It's not just an evolutionary carbon-14 dating thing. The principles, the known principles of physics and spectrometers is what gives us so much of this information.
Yeah. Thank you. We might not have time to hit all the questions, but that was a fantastic answer. Talk to us a little bit about, since we're still talking about the age of the Earth and the age of life, talk to us a little bit about, that was really helpful with the dating. Talk to us a little bit about fossils. There's layers of rock. There's ice ages, like you can go into a cave and see layer after layer. There's continental drift, the idea of Pangea, and then the world today doesn't look like it's always looked, hence people could walk across the Bering Strait, and we find sea creatures on the tops of mountains and these kind of things. Talk to us a little bit about so the radiometric dating is very scientific and specific, and that's really helpful. I think most people are more familiar with things like fossils. They go to the museum, they see T-Rex with his tiny arms, which are either on their way out or on their way in. They don't serve a purpose yet. And so what are your thoughts on some other things that kind of give us hints on the age of the Earth or age of life?
That's good. Well, fossils is certainly one thing. There's a replica of
I'll move Cleopatra here.
A velociraptor from like Jurassic Park, you know, not the T-Rex, like the mini T-Rex.
Yeah, the scarier ones with the claws.
That's a replica of a velociraptor skeleton. So you find something like that, and it's like, well, wow, what in the world is that?
Yeah, it's not a conspiracy theory. People didn't just like find a bunch of bones and make a creature. They find fully formed skeletons.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there are things, and I think this is really fascinating. There are some things that are real obvious in our world around us that are in layers that are easy to interpret if you know what you're looking for and you pay attention. One thing is like tree rings. That's a simple thing. Most everyone knows that you can date a tree by the number of rings, because trees normally they grow a lot in the spring. When there's water and sunshine, they grow quickly, and then they go dormant in the wintertime, and the dark rings are when they get dormant and they don't grow hardly at all. So I can take these rings, it's actually called dendrochronology, where scientists study tree rings, and I can count these tree rings and I can know how old this tree is. I can even see what time of the year it was cut down in the springtime, because there's some new growth right there. So there are some trees on Earth, the bristlecone pine in California, those things live to almost 5,000 years old. So by overlapping tree rings, you can date the Earth back about 13,000 years just with tree rings. There are ice cores. They have gone in Greenland, our new state. And,
Your next Canada.
And Antarctica. And they have drilled ice core samples down almost 2 miles down, pull them out, and the ice falls in layers, kind of like tree rings. You can look at these layers of the ice fall throughout the seasons. So with ice core samples, you can go back about 800,000 years. Through fossils and rock. The theory is that the newer stuff's on the top, the older stuff's buried down below. So you have sedimentary rock, which I went walking in this area a week or so ago. We have a lot of limestone where we live, and this is some limestone, which is sedimentary rock. This is laid down, it's mostly crushed marine shells. So there's a shell right there, that conch shell. Why don't you hand me that thing? You know, say, what kind of similar? It's because that's what this is a bunch of crushed up shells from marine creatures from ancient times when we were at the bottom of the sea here. So you can see, like in the sedimentary rock that's laid down layer upon layer, where these fossils are. And as you look at the fossils, you'll see all over the world, there are more primitive fossils at the bottom. And then as you go up higher and higher, they get more and more advanced, more and more developed. So that is a good example of how you can date life forms on Earth, is by looking at the fossil record.
Yeah.
You know, so we've dated moon rocks.
I was about to say, when rocks hit the Earth from space, those are going to have a different age.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of my best props
I didn't say meteor or meteorite or asteroid because I don't remember the difference, but there you go.
Did I? I'm already
No, come on,
losing
here we
it.
go.
Did I show this to you?
You have not.
Okay. Well,
I'm too distracted by that statue.
This is this is an iron nickel meteorite.
Okay.
And
that's an actual piece. That's not a replica.
this is an actual replica. Hold your
that's
hand
an actual
out.
replica.
That is the oldest thing you can hold in your hand.
Wait, it's a replica or it's a piece?
That is a real iron nickel meteorite.
Okay.
That thing is
So I'm holding space.
4.56 billion years. This was formed before the Earth was formed.
That's insane.
That's the oldest thing. There's some
Look at the difference of new and old. New and old here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So that's
crazy.
This was formed about 60 million years before the Earth was formed. It came from the asteroid belt. So we can date these things and say, wow, this is even 60 million older than the oldest rocks from the moon or the Earth.
Yeah.
This was made from the gas and dust when our solar system was first getting started. Mind-boggling, isn't it?
It is mind-boggling.
This one hit in Argentina about 5,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But
That's
anyway.
fantastic. Okay, I want to ask, let me see how we're doing. Okay, we got a little time. I want to ask a few questions. I've probably got 3 more. One I want to ask, this is going to be a little bit more philosophical.
Okay.
This is, one of the things I like about my podcast, this is just shameless self-promotion, by the way, is that it's a true free speech platform. I've got all kinds of different guests. I've had on atheists. I have on a guy that's a pastor that's coming next week. I have on people that like certain political views and don't like others. You are, in addition to being a man of science, you're also a man of faith. Give us your views on how evolution fits with that. Is there design in the universe? Are science and because I've got friends that are atheists that are into science. I got a friend who's Jewish that's into science. I got friends that are Christians that are into like. They're all doing science, but they have different worldviews or theologies or religions or whatever. Talk to us about your view. I don't mean to talk to us all about your religion and stuff, but I mean, do you feel like these things are at odds? Do you feel like they go together? Do you feel like science and faith have some areas of tension? Do you feel like what we've talked about today with evolution is a defeater with a lot of traditional views of where humans come from if somebody is more religious? I'm going to just leave that open to you to answer however you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's an exciting and interesting and deep question, and thank you for asking
because we've got fossils, and we've got like some religious icons, and so I can tell that you've got a foot in several camps, if that's fair.
Yes. Yeah, that is my interest, is the intersection of those things.
Okay.
So this is my personal view.
Sure.
And I'm not trying to sway anyone to say
you can
this
say
is
whatever you want. This is a free speech
this
platform.
is not
Believe whatever you want. Randy, you speak for
this
yourself.
isn't the view that I'm saying I've got this figured out.
Okay.
This is just how I see it right now, and my views have changed over time. Okay, number one, as a biological process, evolution has an overwhelming amount of evidence for it, with the fossils, genetics, changes in species you can see over time. I mean, you just can't walk away from that evidence. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's real, and the science is very solid. So that's one thing. Now, on the other side, evolution does not explain everything. It really doesn't. So there are some philosophical and theological concerns I have about that. And one of the big ones is that I understand how evolution changes living organisms, but I find the idea that all life as we see it today is due solely to unguided accidental processes and natural selection. I find that idea highly implausible.
Okay, tell me why.
So I have some tension there. So I'm a Christian.
Okay.
And I have some tension between some interpretations of some scriptures, especially in Genesis, and the findings of evolution. So you find that, and this gets into a really fun and interesting philosophical topic, but humans have some capacities that cannot be explained by science or by evolution. We have rationality, we have a moral sense, we have consciousness. The consciousness is considered the hard problem. I mean, all the way back to the ancient Greeks have been trying to figure that out. We still don't know what consciousness is. So there are things in our lives that evolution does not explain. So there's apparently some tension there. So how do I resolve this tension between my Christian beliefs and my belief in evolution. And what I do is I reframe the question, and I say that God uses evolution as a biological process to create the diversity of life we have on Earth, fulfilling his purposes. Much like the force of gravity, with gravity as a force of nature and our laws of planetary motion makes the planets go around. I don't think God has to stick his finger down and move the Earth a little bit every time you have gravity and you have certain laws, physical laws. So biological evolution is just how he decided to do it. He decided to do it that way. So it's just a biological force that God used to create life. So it doesn't mean, so in this evolution, I'm not saying that started life. That's a separate issue. Where did life come from? This is all about once life was here, how did it change? But where did it come from to begin with? Like from inorganic matter? We still don't have a good handle on that at all. We might not ever get a good handle on that. I think I personally think God is integral to the whole process and controls it, sustains it. That's a biblical concept that God sustains, maintains, and controls our world and our universe. Now, to me, that is the most interesting question. Not did evolution happen, but how did God use evolution to create us? How does God, it's called the divine action. How does God step into our world, our physical world, me and you live in, and control things and make things happen for his purposes? Now, that's a juicy question. I don't know that we'll ever get a good answer for that, but that's one of the ways. So I reframe the issue and just say, evolution is just how he did it.
Thank you. Can I summarize that and make sure I understood you correctly? So your view is, God is probably what starts everything, but after he starts everything, the method that he uses to get to humans or whatever is the process of evolution. And for you, this is not an issue between like science and faith. You're saying you can have both. This is more of an issue of interpretation of Scripture. Is that what you would say?
Exactly.
With your view?
Especially the first 11 chapters of Genesis, I think. If you interpret the first chapters of Genesis in kind of a wooden literalistic manner, that you will have some trouble understanding all this ancient times, deep time and all that stuff. If you view that, I think in the ancient Near Eastern culture, and so this view I'm presenting, it's called evolutionary creation or theistic evolution. I like evolutionary creation better.
Okay.
This is not a fringe view. This is not a liberal view. There are many Christian scholars and scientists who have no problems with what I have said.
I think Alistair McGrath holds this view. He's a big theologian that's he's got 7 degrees from Oxford, but he's done science and theology. I think that's his view.
William Lane Craig at Biola and Talbot School of Theology, which is where I went to seminary, has no trouble with that. And he's probably one of the greatest living Christian philosophers. Kenneth Keithley at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, I think, is open to this ancient times. Alvin Plantinga, N.T. Wright, John Walton, Francis Collins, C.S. Lewis, John Polkinghorne, Arthur Peacock.
Can you tell us who some of these people are? Some of these people the audience might know and some might not.
Well, they're C.S. Lewis, famous author, Mere Christianity. Some of these are physicists who are all these people are Christians who most of them are scientists or philosophers. So they're very well informed and they have no trouble with the basic framework that I'm presenting here. So I just want to say that this theistic evolution is not a fringe liberal view. It's a growing view that even conservative evangelicals are beginning to engage with the science. It's happened slowly, but they are engaging with the science and they are engaging with the age of the earth and they are engaging with evolution. And so it's actually a lot of respected scholars are fine with what I'm saying.
So let me because my background, I'm a history of ideas guy. So what you said reminds me of something. So are you saying that kind of what you believe the Christian community is going through now is kind of what happened with finding out that the Earth was not the center of the solar system, where that was seen as a fringe thing. Maybe you're denying the Bible, whatever, but the science. I'm thinking, I remember reading Galileo's letter to the Grand Duchess Christina, where he's being attacked for his views. And he basically says, if my views are wrong, then you shouldn't just disprove it to me with the Bible. You should also disprove it to me with science. Because if God and science are supposed to agree, show me the science. And so would you say that like what you think your views and the camps that you run in now are doing is similar to what happened when it was discovered that, the sun was the center of the solar system, or it was discovered that, the sky you mentioned was not a firmament, was not a beaten down dome, but that rather we could send things to space. Do you just feel like this is just kind of the next step in our science, or what are your views?
Probably so. I think that's a good summary. We tend to think that we've arrived and we've got it all figured out. We're just a little not. And we're in history, we're moving on our ideas. Mm-hmm. Ideas spread very, very slowly, sometimes through cultures, through societies.
Yeah.
And yes, I do think that it's changing. A lot of the hotly debated topics about the age of the Earth, I think in 50 years, that'll be a done thing. It'll just be a footnote in some textbook that's like, oh yeah, they used to think the Earth was only a few thousand years old. Because if you say that kicks out most of science.
Yeah.
Most of science. I mean, geology doesn't work, astronomy, cosmology, physics.
Yeah, it's not an evolutionary thing. You're throwing out the whole system if you throw out that age.
You really are. Science does not make sense unless you had the existence of this deep time that we've been talking about.
Okay. Let me ask one more question just because I know we're coming up on time and this will be the last one. This has been fantastic, by the way. You're a good teacher. This is a lot of fun. I enjoy these. I might steal some of these when you're not looking and give them off to whoever retweets the most. Okay, this is one I didn't include in there. I just thought of this morning that I thought would be helpful, but I just want to get your thoughts on. This is something we've already talked about. I'm not setting you up for anything scary. There's been a recent disregard for those who are in authority in positions of science in our culture. We've talked a lot about this, that we've kind of just gotten rid of experts. Because experts have made mistakes in the past, because there are some scientists who get things wrong, there's this weird thing now where because people have access to the internet or chat GPT or whatever, they now just think they know as much as a scientist, they know as much as a doctor, they know as much as a lawyer. And so we're seeing in our culture, we have some people that too much just bow down to the science and they don't ask questions. You always have to ask questions. Science's job is to critique each other, right? It's got to be open to verification. But then I'm also seeing on the other side of the spectrum, people that kind of treat science like it's a conspiracy theory, or they kind of treat it like, what do the doctors know? What do the scientists know? Radiometric dating doesn't do that. They don't know this about fossils. And so I see kind of the extremes on both ends. What are your thoughts on what respect should we have for the scientist within these fields, knowing that science always changes, but also where should we sometimes have to defer? Like no matter how much research I do on evolution, I'm not going to know as much as a professional evolutionary biologist who just does this all day, every day. I'm busy reading old dead guys. What are your thoughts on that? It's a pretty open-ended question. You can take it wherever you want.
Well, that is the question of the hour. That is the question, I think one of the most important questions facing our society. And this is getting into some of your societal issues. I saw, I get this thing where it's called Visual Capitalist. I'm not giving them a plug, but they have a lot of interesting things. And there was something in there today.
This episode today is supported by Visual Capital. LLC, don't sue us.
And they said that there's some, this just came out. They said there's a World Economic Summit. Mm-hmm. And they asked 900 scholars and experts, what are the biggest risk to the world today? And for the next 2 years, they said a short term over 2 years and a longer term, like 10 years. They said that the number one risk to society, to the world today, is misinformation and disinformation. It's denying truth. It's a postmodernist idea. I believe you know a lot more about postmodernism than I do, but it's a denial that truth exists. And there are, from the Enlightenment times, there are objective facts and there is truth. And as a Christian, all truth is God's truth. We don't need to be scared of the truth. Don't fear investigating science and think it's going to upset your little worldview, your little apple cart. I mean, if it's true, it's true. Embrace it and deal with it, I think it's a huge serious issue. I agree with those people who did that. I think that is a denial of truth, a denial of expertise, of peer review. I've heard people say, oh, you can't believe that's peer-reviewed journal. I got an article published in a peer-reviewed, I reviewed a physics book recently and got it published in a peer-reviewed science journal. It took me a year to get through all the peer review. Mm-hmm. And it's a process. If it's a legitimate journal, mm-hmm. peer review is awesome because you get all the people that are actually trained and knowledgeable on something, look at your work and say whether that's right. So to throw out experts, to throw out peer review, to throw out science and say, well, I'm just going to do my own research on the internet and just come up with something, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
But to me, wow, that's kind of a strong statement coming from me, but I think it is.
Yeah, no, what the internet's done is it allows everyone to have access to information, but they don't have the training to know what's good and bad information. They don't have the training to know what's good and bad research. So when I talk to somebody and they say, I've done a bunch of research, and I say, what libraries did you go to? What articles that are not scanned in yet did you have sent over from Oxford? Or, what's your research methodology? They have no idea. They're like, I Googled stuff. And I'm like, that's not real research. And so what I'm seeing is there is, I think the next step, because you're right, the misinformation to disinformation is huge on both sides, politically and such. What I think the next thing that we have to do as thinking people is to teach people what is a good and bad argument? What is good and bad research? What is good and bad evidence? Because someone can make a really strong, compelling case with really terrible evidence. And so that seems to be, I think research methodology will be the thing. Because now we have all the info. It's easy to get info. It's discerning what's good and bad info and why, and being aware of biases and stuff, which I think will be the next big thing that we have to figure out post-internet and AI. So anyway,
yes.
Randy Smith, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you for all this. Thank you for your time. Thanks for sharing your views. That was fascinating.
Well, it was super fun.
Yeah.
Really was fun. I really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you guys for tuning in. Ideological. We'll see you next time.